He ordered a quiet bride through letters. The wild, broken woman who arrived would shatter his lonely heart forever.
Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories. Turn on the bell icon so you can do not miss any new video.
The wind swept across the Wyoming plains as Jacob Mercer stood on the porch of his modest ranch house, watching the dust settle from the stagecoach that had just departed. Beside him stood a woman he had never met until 5 minutes ago, his mail-order bride. He had specifically requested someone calm, sensible, and experienced in household duties, someone who would bring peace to his solitary existence. What he got was Rosalind Hayes, a fiery-haired woman with emerald eyes that sparkled with mischief and a spirit that seemed barely contained within her small frame. "So this is it?" Rosalind asked, her voice carrying a musical quality that made Jacob's heart skip despite his immediate concerns. "This is where I'll be living." Jacob nodded slowly, still trying to reconcile the quiet, modest woman described in the letters with this vibrant creature standing before him. Her dress was dusty from travel, her hair had escaped its pins, and there was a smudge of dirt on her cheek. Yet she looked more alive than anyone he had ever seen. "The house needs work," he admitted, his voice gruff from disuse. He had spent too many years talking only to cattle and horses. "But it's sturdy, warm in winter." Rosalind laughed, and the sound startled him. It was genuine and unrestrained, nothing like the polite titters he remembered from the women in town. "Mr. Mercer, I grew up in a one-room shack in Missouri with 6 siblings. This looks like a palace to me." Before he could respond, she had grabbed her worn carpet bag and marched inside, leaving him standing alone with his confusion. That first week tested every ounce of patience Jacob possessed. Rosalind did not cook quietly. She sang while she worked, old folk songs and hymns that echoed through the house. She did not tend the garden with careful, measured movements. She attacked the weeds like they had personally offended her, talking to the vegetables as if they could hear her encouragement. One morning Jacob found her in the barn, attempting to saddle his most temperamental horse, a black stallion named Thunder that had thrown every ranch hand who dared approach him. "What in tarnation are you doing?" Jacob shouted, rushing forward. Rosalind turned to him with that infuriating smile. "I'm going to ride him. He needs exercise and I need to see this land I'm supposed to call home. That horse is dangerous. He's hurt men twice your size." But Rosalind had already turned back to Thunder, her voice dropping to a gentle murmur that Jacob could barely hear. She spoke to the horse like he was an old friend, her hand moving slowly along his neck. To Jacob's absolute astonishment, Thunder's ears, which had been pinned back in anger, slowly relaxed. The horse let out a breath and lowered his head. "How did you do that?" Jacob asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rosalind glanced over her shoulder. "Animals respond to kindness and patience, Mr. Mercer. Same as people." There was something in her eyes when she said it, a flash of pain that disappeared as quickly as it came. In that moment, Jacob realized there was far more to Rosalind Hayes than met the eye. As the weeks passed, Jacob found himself watching her more than he cared to admit. He noticed how she flinched at sudden loud noises, how she sometimes woke before dawn and sat on the porch, staring at the horizon as if expecting something or someone to appear. He noticed the faded bruise on her wrist that she always kept covered with her sleeve. One evening, as they sat down to dinner, Jacob finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "The letters," he said slowly, "they weren't written by you, were they?" Rosalind's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully, her eyes meeting his with a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. "No," she admitted, "they were written by Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house." "I can't read or write, Mr. Mercer. She helped me respond to your advertisement." Jacob felt something shift in his chest. "Why didn't you tell me? Would you have wanted me if you knew?" Her voice was steady, but he could see her hands trembling slightly. "A wild girl who can't even sign her own name? You wanted quiet, You wanted respectable. I'm neither of those things. Why did you come then? Why answer the advertisement at all?" The silence stretched between them. Outside, the wind howled against the windows and the fire crackled in the hearth. When Rosalind finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Because I was running, Mr. Mercer. Running from a man who believed he owned me. Running from a life that was killing me slowly. When I saw your advertisement, I saw freedom. I saw a chance to become someone new." Tears glistened in her eyes. "I'm sorry for deceiving you. If you want me to leave, I'll go come morning." Jacob sat in stunned silence. He thought of his own past, the loneliness that had driven him to seek a bride through letters rather than courtship. He thought of his mother who had died when he was young, leaving him with a father who expressed love through silence and hard work. He had become that same man, hiding from emotion behind the endless demands of ranch life. "I don't want you to leave," he said, the words surprising himself. "And my name is Jacob." Rosalind looked up at him, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. "What? You've been calling me Mr. Mercer for weeks. If we're going to make this work, you should probably call me by my given name." For the first time since he had met her, Rosalind was speechless. The months that followed brought changes neither of them expected. Jacob began teaching Rosalind to read, their heads bent together over the family Bible each evening after dinner. She was a quick learner, her mind sharp despite her lack of formal education. In return, she taught him to laugh again, to find joy in small moments he had overlooked for years. She taught him to see his ranch, not as a burden of endless chores, but as a living, breathing home. She planted flowers by the porch, organized dances for the neighboring ranchers, and slowly transformed his house of solitude into a place of warmth and welcome. But not everything was easy. Rosalind's nightmares continued, and there were nights when Jacob would find her crying silently by the window, unreachable in her grief. He learned to simply sit beside her, offering his presence without demanding explanations. One autumn afternoon, a stranger rode onto the property. Jacob was in the far pasture when he saw the horse approaching the house, and something in the rider's posture sent a chill down his spine. He kicked his horse into a gallop, his heart pounding. By the time he reached the house, Rosalind was standing on the porch, her face pale as death. The stranger, a tall man with cold eyes and a cruel smile, had dismounted and was speaking to her in low, threatening tones. "Rosalind," Jacob called out, swinging down from his saddle. "Who is this?" The stranger turned, sizing Jacob up with obvious contempt. "I'm her husband friend, come to take back what's mine." The word hit Jacob like a physical blow. Husband. He looked at Roz. Rosalind saw the terror in her eyes and felt his world crumbling. "I'm not your wife anymore, Daniel," Rosalind said, her voice shaking but defiant. "I filed for divorce before I left Missouri. The papers were signed by the judge." Daniel laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Papers don't mean nothing to me. You belong to me, Rosie. You always have, and you always will." Jacob stepped forward, positioning himself between Rosalind and her former husband. "The lady says she doesn't want to go with you. I suggest you leave my property." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "This isn't your concern, rancher. Everything that happens on my land is my concern. And Rosalind is my wife now, legally wed before God and the state of Wyoming. So I'll say it one more time. Leave, or I'll make you leave." The tension stretched taut as a wire. Jacob could see Daniel calculating his options, weighing whether this weathered rancher was worth the trouble. Something in Jacob's eyes must have convinced him, because he eventually stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. "This isn't over," Daniel spat at Rosalind. "You'll regret ever leaving me." He mounted his horse and rode away, but the damage was done. The peace they had built was shattered. That night, Rosalind finally told Jacob everything. She told him about her marriage at 16 to a man her father had chosen. She told him about the years of cruelty, the isolation, the crushing loneliness. She told him about the night she had finally found the courage to run, taking nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's locket. "I should have told you before we married," she whispered, huddled in a chair by the fire, looking smaller than he had ever seen her. "You deserved the truth." Jacob knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Look at me, Rosalind." She raised her eyes to meet his, and he saw every wall she had built to protect herself. Walls he recognized because he had built the same ones. "I married you because I was lonely," he said honestly. "I wanted someone to cook and clean and make my life easier. I didn't want complications. I didn't want emotions. I didn't want love." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "But you crashed into my life like a summer storm, and you changed everything. You made me feel things I thought I'd buried forever." Tears were streaming down Rosalind's face now. "Jacob, I love you," he said, and the words felt like a dam breaking inside him. "I love your wildness and your laughter and your stubborn spirit. I love the way you talk to horses and sing while you work. I love that you've made this house a home. And I swear to you, as long as there's breath in my body, no one will ever hurt you again." Rosalind threw her arms around him, sobbing into his shoulder. He held her tight, feeling her trembling, and made a silent promise to whatever God might be listening that he would spend the rest of his life earning her trust. Daniel did return 3 months later, with 2 hired men at his side. But this time, Jacob was ready. The neighboring ranchers, the same ones who had laughed and danced at the gatherings Rosalind had organized, stood with him. They sent Daniel away with a clear message. Rosalind had a family now, people who would protect her. Winter came, harsh and unforgiving, but the house stayed warm. Jacob and Rosalind spent long evenings reading together, their skills improving in tandem. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, their dreams, their fears, the future they were building together. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside, Rosalind handed Jacob a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a handwritten note, her letters still shaky but legible. "My dearest Jacob," it read, "you wanted a quiet wife, but fate gave you me instead. I am not quiet. I am not calm. I am wild and broken and more trouble than I'm worth. But I am yours, completely and forever. Thank you for loving me anyway. Your wife, Rosalind." Jacob read the words 3 times, his eyes blurring with tears he hadn't shed in decades. When he looked up, Rosalind was watching him with that familiar mixture of hope and fear. He pulled her into his arms and whispered against her hair, "I didn't know what I needed until you showed me. Being quiet was just being lonely. Being calm was just being afraid to feel. You woke me up, Rosalind. You saved me. Spring came with new beginnings." The ranch thrived under their combined care. Rosalind's garden grew wild and beautiful, just like her. And in the quiet moments, because there were quiet moments now, peaceful ones filled with contentment rather than emptiness, Jacob would look at his wild girl and thank fate for ignoring every careful specification he had written in his advertisement. He had asked for quiet, and fate had given him something far better. Fate had given him love. Years later, when their children would ask how they met, Rosalind would laugh her wonderful, unrestrained laugh and tell them, "Your father ordered a sensible wife through the mail, and I showed up instead. Best mistake he ever made." And Jacob, his arm around the woman who had transformed his life, would smile and agree. Some fates are better than any plan.